My wife filed for divorce and demanded half of my inheritance, convinced she was entitled to a fortune she never earned. She walked into court expecting a payday. Instead, she walked away with nothing but regret. Hello, Reddit plus here. My grandfather protected me from my wife years before I realized I needed protection. The strange part is that he never argued with her, never raised his voice, and never tried to break us up. He just watched, listened, and quietly prepared for the day she would reveal exactly who she was. That day arrived 3 days after his inheritance hit my account. I am 36 years old now, and this happened a little over 2 years ago. The man who raised me was my grandfather, Harold. My parents drifted in and out of my life growing up, chasing their own problems and responsibilities they never seemed ready for. Harold was the one who packed my lunches, attended my school events, and taught me how to change a tire, balance a budget, and keep my word. When I met my wife, Brianna, I thought my life was finally coming together. She was charming, beautiful, and knew exactly what to say. Looking back, I realized she also asked an unusual number of questions about my grandfather. Not about his health, not about his hobbies, not about the stories I shared, about his properties, his investments, his savings. At the time, I thought she was simply interested in my family. Now I know better. We dated for less than a year before she started pushing for marriage. She talked about soulmates, destiny, building a future together. I fell for every word. My grandfather attended the wedding, smiled for the photographs, and never once objected. But months later, he said something that stuck with me. Son, some people look at you and see a partner. Others look at you and see an opportunity. I got offended. I defended her immediately. He never argued back. He simply nodded. Maybe I'm wrong, he said. That was the end of the conversation. Or so I thought. For 6 years, Brianna barely acknowledged him. When he was moved into assisted living, she found excuses not to visit. Too busy, too tired, not feeling well. Old age made her uncomfortable. She joined me exactly once, spent 20 minutes scrolling through her phone, then complained the entire drive home. My grandfather noticed. He noticed everything. When he passed away, I was devastated. I cried harder than I had since childhood. I lost the person who had been my entire support system. At the funeral, while I was standing beside his casket trying not to fall apart, Brianna leaned over and quietly asked when the estate would be settled. Not if I was okay. Not if I needed anything. When the estate would be settled. Something inside me shifted that day. 3 months later, everything was finalized. My grandfather left me his home, investment accounts, savings, and several pieces of land he had accumulated over decades. After taxes and legal processing, the total value was around $470,000. The funds arrived on a Tuesday morning. Friday evening, Brianna asked me to sit down. She had divorce papers. I remember staring at the documents and feeling oddly calm. She launched into a prepared speech about growing apart, about needing to find herself, about how she hadn't been happy for years. I listened quietly. Then I asked one question. If you've been unhappy for years, why wait until this week? Her face tightened. The timing is unrelated. It was such an obvious lie that I almost laughed. Instead, I signed nothing. Over the next few days, I learned she had already retained a lawyer before speaking to me. The divorce strategy had been prepared in advance. She wanted half the marital home, half my retirement, half my savings, and most importantly, half the inheritance. Her attorney argued that because the inheritance was received during the marriage, she deserved a substantial share. Brianna was absolutely convinced she was about to become wealthy. The confidence was almost impressive. What she didn't know was that my grandfather had spent years planning for exactly this possibility. A week after the divorce filing, my attorney handed me a sealed envelope that had been included with the estate paperwork. Inside was a letter from my grandfather. I still have it. The first line made my chest tighten. If you're reading this, someone has shown you who they really are. The letter explained that he had structured every asset through a protected trust. Every dollar, every property, every investment. Separate, untouchable. He wrote that he hoped the protection would never be necessary, but he wanted to make certain that what he built through decades of sacrifice stayed with the family member he intended it for. Me. When Brianna's attorney received the trust documentation, everything changed. Suddenly, their demands became requests, then suggestions, then desperate arguments. The inheritance wasn't merely separate, it had been engineered to remain separate. I had never deposited a cent into our joint accounts. I had never used the funds to pay shared debts. Every safeguard had been followed. There was nothing they could attack. The day Brianna learned she wasn't getting any of it, she called me screaming. I put the phone on speaker and listened. She accused me of deception, manipulation, financial abuse, greed. Then she made a mistake. She yelled, "I wasted 6 years for nothing." The room went silent. Even my attorney stopped writing. Because in that moment, she finally said the quiet part out loud. Not 6 years of marriage, not 6 years of love. 6 years of investment. 6 years she believed would eventually pay off. When she realized what she'd admitted, she hung up. The divorce hearing 4 months later was almost anticlimactic. She received her share of the house equity, part of the retirement account, some jointly accumulated assets, roughly $45,000 after everything was divided. The inheritance remained entirely mine. When the judge finalized the order, I looked over at Brianna. She wasn't crying, she wasn't angry, she looked shocked. Like someone who had spent years scratching lottery tickets only to discover the winning ticket belonged to somebody else. But the story didn't end there. She appealed. Lost, she appealed again, lost again. Every appeal meant more attorney fees, more expenses, more frustration. By the time she finally stopped fighting, a significant portion of what she'd received was gone. About a year later, I ran into one of her former friends. That's how I learned the truth. Apparently, Brianna had spent years telling people that my grandfather's money would eventually set us up for life. She had plans for luxury vacations, a bigger house, designer furniture, and a lifestyle neither of us could actually afford. The inheritance wasn't just part of her future, it was the entire future she imagined, and she never got a single dollar. Today, I live in a home I purchased with part of the inheritance. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful. In the living room sits a framed photograph of my grandfather smiling beside his old pickup truck. Every morning I see that picture while drinking coffee. Sometimes I still think about the letter, about how he understood people better than I ever did. He didn't save me by fighting with my wife. He didn't save me by warning me repeatedly. He saved me by preparing quietly and letting the truth reveal itself. Brianna thought she was divorcing me at the perfect moment. She believed she had timed everything flawlessly. What she didn't know was that my grandfather had been planning several moves ahead for years. In the end, she walked away with less money than she spent trying to get more. I walked away with my inheritance, my freedom, and one final lesson from the man who raised me. Sometimes the people who love you most protect you long after they're gone. And sometimes karma arrives wearing a suit, carrying legal documents, and reading from a trust agreement. A few months after the second appeal failed, I thought the entire chapter was finally over. I was wrong. The first sign came on a Sunday afternoon. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. At first I assumed it was spam. Then I opened it. It was Brianna. "Can we talk?" Just 4 words. After everything that had happened, I almost deleted it without responding. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. I replied with a simple question. "About what?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, her response came through. "I made mistakes." I stared at the screen. For nearly a year, she'd called me selfish, accused me of hiding money, blamed the courts, blamed my grandfather, blamed everyone except herself. Now suddenly she wanted to discuss mistakes. I ignored the message. The next day, she texted again. Then again the following week. Eventually, she sent a long paragraph. She said she missed our life together. She said she regretted how things ended. She said she'd been under pressure from friends and family who convinced her she deserved more. Not once did she actually apologize. Everything was someone else's fault. I blocked the number. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my house. That was the moment I realized she wasn't trying to make peace. She was trying to find a way back in. I answered the door and almost didn't recognize her. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Like life had finally stopped giving her special treatment. She forced a smile. "Can we talk for a minute?" "No." The smile disappeared. "Please." "No." I started closing the door. Then she said something that made me stop. "I never thought you'd actually be okay without me." There it was, the truth. Not "I miss you," not "I love you." She was shocked that I had moved on, that her leaving hadn't destroyed me, that I wasn't sitting alone waiting for her return. I looked at her for a few seconds. Then I said something I'd wanted to say for a long time. "You didn't leave because you stopped loving me." Her face tightened. "You left because you thought there was a bigger prize waiting on the other side." For the first time, she had no response. None. I closed the door. That should have been the end. But karma apparently wasn't finished. About 6 months later, I received a call from an old mutual friend. He asked if I'd heard what happened. I hadn't. Apparently, Brianna had gotten engaged. Quickly. Very quickly. To a man nearly 20 years older than her. According to our friend, he owned several businesses and drove expensive cars. Everyone assumed she'd finally found the wealthy lifestyle she'd always wanted. The engagement lasted 4 months. Then it collapsed. The reason? The man discovered she had secretly accumulated substantial credit card debt. He ended the relationship immediately. When he left, he also asked for the engagement ring back. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. Honestly, I mostly felt tired. By then, I'd stopped caring. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I was finally there. A few weeks before Christmas that year, something arrived in my mailbox, a handwritten envelope, no return address. Inside was a folded letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Brianna. The letter was only one page. For once, there were no excuses, no blame, no manipulation, just honesty. She admitted she had spent years treating relationships like financial opportunities. She admitted she'd expected my grandfather's inheritance to become her inheritance. She admitted filing for divorce when she realized she couldn't access it. And at the bottom, she wrote something that stuck with me. I spent so much time chasing what I thought would make me happy that I destroyed the one thing that actually could have. I read the letter twice. Then I put it away. I never responded. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, because there was nothing left to say. The lesson had already been learned. A year later, I met someone new, not at a fancy event, not through an app, not through mutual friends. I met her while volunteering at a community project my grandfather used to support. We started talking, then laughing, then spending time together. The first thing she asked about my grandfather wasn't what he left me. It was what he was like. For nearly an hour, I told stories about him, his terrible jokes, his stubbornness, his habit of fixing things nobody asked him to fix. She listened to every word. When I finished, she smiled and said, "He sounds like someone I would have liked." And somehow, that simple sentence hit harder than anything else. Because for the first time in years, I felt like someone saw the person behind the money. The person my grandfather had spent his entire life raising. That night before going to bed, I glanced at his photograph in the living room, the same photograph that's been there since I moved in. For a moment, I almost laughed, because I could practically hear him saying it. "I told you so, kid." And honestly, he had.